Imagine boarding a plane, ready for a routine flight, only to have your day take an unexpected and heartbreaking turn. That's exactly what happened to Lisa, a confident and accomplished black woman traveling alone on what should have been a peaceful journey. Dressed impeccably and carrying herself with grace, she exuded the kind of poise that comes from knowing your worth. But not everyone saw her that way. From the moment she stepped aboard, she felt it. The stares, the whispered judgments. It wasn't long before she found herself in an unexpected confrontation with none other than the flight captain himself. His tone was cold, his words condescending, as if her mere presence offended him. The humiliation he subjected her to was not only unjustified but deeply rooted in prejudice. Passengers watched in stunned silence, some averting their eyes, while others muttered their disapproval under their breath. Yet, no one intervened. Lisa, however, held her head high, refusing to let his behavior break her spirit. What the captain didn't know was that Lisa wasn't just anyone. She had an unwavering strength and a powerful ally. Somewhere in the airport, someone who loved her dearly was just moments away. Someone who wouldn't tolerate disrespect toward his wife under any circumstances. As the tension in the cabin reached its peak, a commotion at the gate turned heads. A man, dressed sharply and exuding a commanding presence, approached the aircraft. He wasn't just any man. He was her husband, a billionaire with influence, integrity, and an undeniable sense of justice. The captain, unaware of what was about to unfold, smirked smugly, convinced he held all the power. But what happens when the tables turn? When Lisa's husband steps in, demanding answers and setting the stage for an unforgettable showdown, everything changes. Stay tuned to see how this incredible story of resilience, love, and justice unfolds, because sometimes the best revenge is standing tall and letting the truth speak for itself. The passengers on the plane couldn't help but whisper as they watched the man stride toward the aircraft. His presence was magnetic, commanding attention without him uttering a single word. Some recognized him instantly. His face often graced headlines, his business ventures the talk of the corporate world. But what truly set him apart wasn't his wealth. It was the way he carried himself, calm yet authoritative, like a man who knew exactly who he was and what he stood for. Inside the cabin, Lisa sat quietly, her hands resting on her lap. She was used to being underestimated, but this was different. The captain's words still echoed in her mind, cutting like a knife. He hadn't just questioned her, he had belittled her, treating her as if she didn't belong. She glanced at the other passengers, wondering if any of them would step up, say something, anything. But silence filled the air, a silence that was louder than words. Meanwhile, at the gate, the flight crew began to shift uncomfortably. The man's arrival had sparked a flurry of nervous glances and hushed conversations. When he reached the plane's door, he paused, his eyes scanning the area as if assessing the situation. The flight attendant stationed there tried to intercept him, but one look from him was enough to make her step aside. As he entered the cabin, heads turned, and a wave of unease rippled through the room. Lisa looked up, her eyes widening as she saw him. She didn't expect him to make it this far, but there he was, her husband, her rock, the one person who had always stood by her side no matter what. The captain, standing near the cockpit, was caught off guard. His smug demeanor faltered, but he quickly tried to regain his composure. "Sir, this is a secure area," he began, his tone clipped. But the man didn't even flinch. "I'm here for my wife," he said firmly, his voice steady but carrying a weight that made everyone in earshot take notice. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Something was about to happen, and no one could look away. The cabin grew eerily silent as Lisa's husband locked eyes with the captain. His expression was calm, but his presence was like a storm waiting to break. Passengers leaned forward, sensing that this was no ordinary confrontation. Lisa sat motionless, her gaze shifting between the two men. She could feel the tension radiating through the air, but she also felt something else, relief. For the first time since boarding the plane, she didn't feel alone. The captain, still trying to maintain control, straightened his posture. "Sir, I'll need you to step back. This is not the place for personal disputes," he said, his tone laced with irritation. Lisa's husband didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "What's not the place," he said, his words slow and deliberate, "is humiliating a paying passenger based on nothing but your own prejudice." The captain's face flushed, his authority visibly slipping. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a voice from the back of the plane interrupted. "I saw what happened," a woman said, standing up. She looked nervous but determined. She didn't do anything wrong. He singled her out for no reason. A murmur spread through the cabin as more passengers began nodding, emboldened by the woman's courage. Some shared their own experiences of what they had witnessed, while others stayed quiet, torn between wanting to support Lisa and fearing the consequences of speaking out. The flight attendants shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. One of them approached Lisa's husband cautiously, whispering something about airline protocol. He listened briefly before shaking his head. "Protocol doesn't excuse discrimination," he said firmly. "Now, I'd like to hear from the captain himself why he felt it was appropriate to treat my wife the way he did." The captain hesitated, his confidence clearly shaken. His gaze darted around the cabin, searching for support, but finding only disapproving stares. He stammered, trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. Lisa watched it all unfold, her emotions a mix of gratitude and anxiety. She knew her husband wasn't going to back down, but what would happen next? As the plane remained grounded, the question lingered: how far would this confrontation go, and who would ultimately hold the power? The tension in the cabin was now suffocating, every passenger holding their breath as the confrontation unfolded. Lisa's husband stood tall, his unwavering gaze fixed on the captain. The man who had once been so smug now looked visibly rattled, his composure cracking under the weight of the moment. Lisa could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to speak, to say something, but the knot in her throat wouldn't let her. This was a moment she had faced so many times before, being dismissed, overlooked, or judged unfairly, but never like this, never so publicly. And yet, for the first time, someone was standing up for her in a way she could never have imagined. The murmurs among the passengers grew louder as more people began voicing their support. A man in a business suit spoke up, his voice firm. "I've flown with this airline for years, and I've never seen anything like this. She didn't deserve to be treated this way." A younger woman added, "It was so uncalled for. He made her feel like she didn't belong here, and it was wrong." The captain, cornered by the growing discontent, tried to regain control. "I was simply enforcing protocol," he said defensively, though his voice lacked conviction. There was no intent to offend anyone. Lisa's husband took a step closer, his tone sharp but calm. "Enforcing protocol. By singling out a woman who has done nothing wrong. By humiliating her in front of everyone." He paused, letting the silence underline his words. "If this is how you represent this airline, then I think everyone here deserves answers." At that moment, a senior flight attendant stepped forward, her expression tense but resolute. She glanced at the captain before turning to Lisa's husband. "Sir, we're trying to de-escalate the situation. Please, let's handle this privately." But he shook his head. "No, this isn't private. It was never private when he humiliated my wife. This needs to be addressed here and now." The plane felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. Everyone was on edge, their eyes darting between Lisa, her husband, and the captain. The question hung heavy in the air. What would happen next? As the cabin buzzed with whispers and uneasy glances, a sudden announcement crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the co-pilot speaking. Due to unforeseen circumstances, we'll be delaying departure for a short period. Thank you for your patience." The words hung heavy in the air, amplifying the tension. Lisa's husband turned toward the cockpit door, his sharp eyes narrowing. It was clear that this wasn't just a delay, it was a move to stall. But why? Before anyone could react further, the senior flight attendant leaned in and whispered something to the captain. He stiffened, his face flushing red, and then stormed into the cockpit, slamming the door behind him. The flight attendant stayed behind, looking as if she wanted to say something but thought better of it. Lisa's husband didn't let the moment pass. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. The flight attendant hesitated before meeting his gaze. "There's been a report," she said cautiously, her words slow and deliberate. "That security is on its way to handle the situation." The room froze. Handle what situation? Lisa's husband pressed. His tone was calm, but there was an edge to it now, a clear warning not to test him. The flight attendant faltered, clearly caught between loyalty to her crew and the undeniable reality unfolding around her. "The captain claims you're disrupting the flight and causing a safety concern," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The passengers erupted into murmurs of disbelief, some openly voicing their frustration. "That's ridiculous," shouted the same woman who had spoken earlier. "He's just standing up for his wife." Lisa felt her chest tighten. This wasn't just about her anymore. They were trying to flip the narrative entirely, to paint her husband as the problem. She glanced at him, but his expression remained steady, his focus unshaken. Suddenly, a voice from the back of the plane interrupted the chaos. "Wait, doesn't this airline have a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination?" It was a man in casual clothes, holding up his phone. "Because if it does, the way he treated her is about to go viral." The captain's voice boomed over the intercom again. "I will not tolerate insubordination on my flight," he snapped, but now his tone was laced with panic. The stakes had shifted, and it was no longer just about who was right or wrong. It was about exposure. Everyone felt it. This was no longer just a heated moment. It was a battle of principles, of justice versus power. The question now wasn't whether the truth would come out, it was who would face the consequences when it did. The air inside the plane was electric, everyone bracing for what would happen next. Passengers exchanged glances, their whispers growing louder as the tension reached its peak. Lisa's husband stood his ground, his presence unshaken even as the situation escalated. The co-pilot emerged from the cockpit, his face pale as he approached the senior flight attendant, who was now visibly distressed. "Security is waiting outside," the co-pilot muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. But before anyone could react, a passenger from the back, the man with the phone, stood up and walked down the aisle. "Before you call security," he said firmly, holding up his phone, "I'd like to show everyone this video I've been recording since this started. It clearly shows the captain's behavior toward this woman, and just to be clear, I've already uploaded it." The cabin erupted in gasps and murmurs. Lisa's husband turned to the man, a small nod of appreciation passing between them. The senior flight attendant's face turned pale as she realized the gravity of the situation. The captain's actions weren't just about to face scrutiny, they were now public knowledge. The cockpit door flew open, and the captain stormed out, his face a mixture of anger and desperation. "This is my flight," he barked, his voice cracking. "I won't let anyone undermine my authority." Lisa's husband stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "This isn't about your authority," he said, locking eyes with the captain. "This is about accountability. You humiliated my wife for no reason, and now the world is going to know about it." At that moment, the flight attendant's intercom crackled again. This time, it wasn't the captain or co-pilot speaking. It was a voice from the ground crew. "We've received word from corporate. The captain is being removed from duty effective immediately. Please remain seated while we handle the situation." The passengers cheered, their relief palpable. The captain's face turned crimson as he was escorted off the plane. But just as everyone thought the ordeal was over, Lisa's husband turned to the co-pilot and said, "Make sure this flight takes off safely, with someone qualified in charge. And tell your company I'll be in touch about what's next." Lisa looked up at her husband, her eyes glistening with a mix of emotions, relief, pride, and love. As the plane finally prepared for departure, she leaned over and whispered, "Thank you for always standing by me." The man with the phone smiled knowingly. "Looks like some captains still have lessons to learn," he said, turning back to his seat. The flight resumed, but the story wasn't over. It had only just begun, with the world watching to see what would happen next. As the plane finally began taxiing down the runway, a sense of calm settled over the cabin. Passengers who had been tense and uncertain now relaxed into their seats, exchanging smiles and nods of solidarity. The ordeal had brought strangers together in an unexpected way, creating a shared moment of justice that no one on board would soon forget. Lisa glanced at her husband, her fingers brushing against his hand. "You didn't have to come all this way," she said softly, though her voice carried a warmth that revealed just how much it meant to her. He smiled, his expression gentle but resolute. "Of course I did," he replied. "No one treats you that way and gets away with it, not when I can do something about it." The man with the phone leaned over from his seat, offering Lisa a reassuring nod. "Don't worry," he said with a grin. "That video's already making waves online. People need to see this kind of thing so it stops happening." Lisa smiled back, grateful for the unexpected ally. It was comforting to know that others cared enough to step in when it mattered most. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the senior flight attendant approached Lisa and her husband. Her demeanor had shifted completely, her tone now respectful, almost apologetic. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry for what happened," she said. "It's not how things should be, and I'll make sure my report reflects that." Lisa nodded, appreciating the gesture, but knowing the larger issue would require more than apologies. Her husband thanked the attendant, but made it clear this was only the beginning. "I'll be following up with the airline," he said firmly. "It's time they start holding people accountable." By the time they landed, news of the incident had already spread. Messages poured in from friends and strangers alike, expressing outrage and support. For Lisa, the journey was more than just a flight. It was a reminder of resilience, the power of standing up for what's right, and the importance of having people in your corner. As she stepped off the plane, hand in hand with her husband, Lisa felt a sense of triumph. The fight wasn't over, but today she had won.